Okay, well now we're going to try running. Now I'm on the client machine again. I have a server which is connected over to that other machine. It's connected on a local IP address, and I have a radio which was connected to that server through the USB port, and it appears here. So it's time to run RSBA1. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run it. And it comes up. Oh, I guess it left that product ID stuff on there. Well, just ignore that. Okay, here we go. Now, in this program, hopefully it comes up like this. If you've already had this thing connected, you have to disconnect it till everything's grayed out. The first step is to go over here to connect set. Even though it says connect set, it really is connection setting. Here's where you have to be very careful. First thing is, this program supports a lot of radios. I've never used these other general whatever, but the radio I'm talking about is an IC7300, and it's a version 1.2. Now for 7610 users, there's only one model. Let's see, get down here, 7610, and if you tell it it's a 7610, some other things will happen, and believe it or not, it'll connect, but it won't work right. So if you don't pick the right radio, you don't get the right response. So I'm going to pick the right one, this IC7300 version 1.2. You don't have to do this more than once, really. Some people try to say, well, it's a remote. I'm going to leave it in remote. This doesn't work. Your radios are either going to be USB or LAN. Now I'll come down here and just pick the 7600 just for fun. The 7600 doesn't show, well, it shows both. It does show USB because the 7610 does have the ability of running as a USB radio. But most users are going to think, well, the LAN is the better method. Frankly, I have my doubts, because if you have more than one radio, you have to use USB. So, but if you're stuck to one radio, then you would pick LAN. If you have a 7610 and the remote utility, you could still pick the radio. This looks like it'll work, but believe me, it won't work. Let's come back here and pick the right radio this time now. Come back to 70, let's see, here it is. It's up here somewhere. A lot of radios. Version 1.2. Now I don't have LAN anymore, but I'm going to use USB. And it says remote utility not used. Absolutely wrong. We have to use, and before I choose this, I want you to look down here. Some of this stuff looks okay. But that's because I've already one time selected this radio. Usually when you select this radio, you are now taking this plug from the RSBA1. You're plugging, I hope I showed this before, I didn't have it off the screen. We're taking the plug that's in RSBA1, plugging it into the radio that is part of the remote utility, which is then hooked to the server, which is then hooked to the remote server, which is then hooked through the USB port to the radio. There's a lot of steps for the information to get from here to there. So it comes from the RSBA1 and out of here, and here are the critical things to check. You see this number 10 here? Virtual port 10, COM port 10. That is not a real COM port. It's a virtual COM port. So, I mean, you could go and screw around with this, but you set 10 and that's the one we're going to use. You have to use 115K. You've told the radio that's what you want. It's ready for 115K. You don't select this right, you're not going to get connected. I am hoping that I remembered the right CIV address for this radio. Better be 7C. If it's not, we're not going to connect. And then I like this down here, software closing turns off the radio. Now what is V audio? You see this down here, virtual audio, virtual audio? It's not really used until you mess around with pre-recorded audio or trying to record a QSO. But it's a good idea to be sure that this one matches up with this one. See this V audio 1 over here, this is V audio 1 here. So I'm going to say OK. And now the acid test whether or not my 7C radio is actually this one. So I'm going to say connect. And it's fiddle farting and it's doing whatever it's doing. And lo and behold, I guessed the right radio. If I hadn't guessed the right radio, so I can change the frequency and all this. If I had guessed the wrong radio, this wouldn't have connected and it would have been very frustrating. But I have connected. Now, before we get into how to use RSBA1, first thing you have to do is change this thing here. When this remote is turned off, you want it to return your radio back to the microphone connection. So I'm going to right click on this. Whoops, I already turned it off. I'm going to right click on this thing. Reconnect. Right click, and I'm going to pull this box down, and here are the other rabbit holes you can get yourself into. You can say, when I turn the remote off, put it on the mic. Yeah, that's fine, except it's not going to work here with the remote on. Best thing, tell it you have a microphone and a USB connector to that radio, and that's what you want to use. Some radios may use the accessory jack, whatever, but these 7300s use the mic and the USB, but I believe it defaults to mic up here. I don't know why. So you've got to do that. Let's see, is there anything else that we want to set here? No. Now, here's a few things you want to do when you are unplugging everything, and you have to unplug everything. You won't be able to use, nobody else will be able to use your radio, and even you won't be able to get into it very easily. First thing you do is you click on the connect. By the way, I'm going to pause this for a second and jump over to the server computer and let you see something. I'm going to pause. Now we're on the server computer, and when you're running, and see there's no server shown here because we're not using this as a client machine. But what is interesting is here you are, you're sitting at home and you've got your radios and you've given your friend in some other part of the world the ability to use your radio. If you look at your server machine, you'll see who's using it. Now in this case, it's some guy over on 172.16.41.122. Oh, well that's me on my other client computer. And that user is busy using my radio. Okay, so we're going to go now back to the client. This was just a look at the server. You could walk over and look at your radio. I can't because these are both at a remote location. So I am going to stop this and go back to the client computer that is connected to this radio. So we're back again. Now, here's how you have to disconnect. And by the way, you have all the controls and all the rest of the stuff. You can do all sorts of adjustments. First thing I'm going to do is disconnect. By the way, there's some cute things you can do here. Let me just take a look at options. You can do some shortcuts here, like how do I want to control the transmitter? And you can do all kinds of interesting things. I'm not going to do any right now, but you can set it up so that when you want to transmit, all you have to do is hit one button on your computer, like the backslash key or the forwards or one of the other buttons that isn't being used for anything else. You can say, you know what, I want to have this thing to transmit, and you got to go through and look for it. I don't know, it's on here somewhere. I want it to transmit when I do something with one of the buttons. And there's an awful lot of this stuff you can go through. Let's see, buttons, what do we have? Oh, here's the transmit button. You say I want to add a keystroke. Well, just for fun, I'm going to add the page up key. I don't know why, I'm just going to add. So I hit this and I tap the page up key, and if it had worked, but it won't. I said add, but it won't let me do it here on this because I am connected with VNC to a computer at another house, and I'm not actually connected to the radio from my house. This is from another house where I have my radios. Okay, here's what you have to do. You have to turn off RSBA1, and it's going to return the radio back to microphone control. So you turn that off, and you wait for it to shut off. Wait for all this to calm down. Okay, it's no longer receiving. Now you have to disconnect this. So you highlight the radio and you say disconnect. And now you want to disconnect the radio, and the answer is yes. And then you can either go ahead and disconnect the server, or if you just simply shut down ICOM Remote like this, it'll go ahead and close the remote utility, and now you're done. So we have finished setting up a server system. We got a radio into it. We've made it accessible from a remote place. And then we went over to a client machine, connected the client using the server window, and set that up. And the radios got pulled from the server into the client, and you didn't have to specify anything more except for that COM port. In fact, I think we can show that again. Let me just pause this while I bring up the remote utility. So when I bring up remote utility, it automatically connected to the server. I didn't have to do this. And it left me in the radio list, so in order to use the client now, I'd have to connect to it. Now the next thing we're going to show is how you set this up when you leave your LAN home network. How do you connect to all this stuff? And right now, you don't have to change that server one bit. Leave it alone. It's ready to go. Even though ICOM says you have to set up your public IP and all that stuff, that's all baloney. You don't have to touch that stuff because a router will convert that incoming packets from an outside system, and your inside server will not know where those are coming from. It will think they're just local, just like this one. Okay, I'm going to shut this down, and then we're going to go into the port forwarding. So this is Jeff, W6FCC. It's after happy hour, so I'm getting sober again, and it's now July 10th, 2018.